Just talking about with Alec about what was happening in the stock markets, and he seemed kind of bullish on things overall. But there have been a lot of people that have moved into the bond market as kind of a safe haven.
Yes, and we're actually seeing a lot of kind of Armageddon talk there of a similar burst as we've seen in the housing market. And Peter Schiff is one of those people. Yeah,
he is. He's with Pacific Euro Pacific Capital, and he joins us from New York. Peter, you're calling for a bond bubble. Why?
Well, the bubble's already here. The question is, when is it going to burst?
Okay.
But anybody who's seeking safety in the bond market, I mean, there's no safety there. I think the only buyers in the bond market are speculators. I think it's got all the dynamics of a bubble. I think, when the Federal Reserve announced their intention to buy long-term treasuries, I think it sparked a speculative wave of buying. Traders are trying to get into the bond market so they can sell to the Treasury. But these are all speculators. Nobody is buying 10-year, 20, 30-year U.S. Treasuries with the intention of holding to maturity. It's all in, everybody is looking to get out, and ultimately the market's going to collapse because there's no real buyers in this market. They're just like condo flippers. They're looking to sell to somebody else.
But what do you think is going to trigger it? Something's got to trigger it, Peter. I mean, we know it's high, but it's not just going to roll over.
Look, what triggered the bursting of the NASDAQ bubble or the real estate bubbles? Bubbles eventually die on their own. I mean, they're like naturally occurring Ponzi schemes. It's the same dynamic as Bernie Madoff's investment fund. Eventually you run out of buyers and the whole thing collapses because these are not real buyers. Nobody wants these treasuries. Everybody who's buying them is looking to sell them. Well, when the last buyer is in and then you start to sell and there's no buyers left, unfortunately, the last remaining buyer is going to be the Fed. But the more bonds the Fed buys, the less bonds are worth. Because the Fed, in order to buy bonds, has to print money. And when you print money, they debase the value of the dollar. So the more inflation the Fed creates, the less attractive bonds become.
Okay, but Ben Bernanke at the Fed, he's actually, I think, intimated that he'd be willing to kind of curb yields if necessary to stop that from happening.
I mean, he can do it, but he can't. All he has is a printing press. And ultimately, unless the Fed is going to buy all the bonds everywhere that are dollar denominated, and of course if they do that, the dollar will have absolutely no value whatsoever, so it won't matter how much money they print, nobody will take it because it won't buy anything. He can't do anything.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Peter, because it's like taking money from one pocket and putting it in the other pocket. But let's go back to who the sellers might be, because we have seen sovereign wealth funds, for instance, huge buyers in this flight to capital to the U.S. dollar and to the U.S. Treasury market. Will they become sellers, do you think?
Of course. Eventually, look, nobody's going to want to buy U.S. government bonds, again, because we can't pay anybody back. The way the U.S. government operates is we borrow money, and then when the interest payments are due, we borrow the money to pay the interest. And when the principal comes due and the bonds mature, we borrow the money to cover that. It's one gigantic Ponzi scheme. And it depends on an ever-increasing supply of people willing to loan us money and hope that there's going to be a greater fool willing to loan us even more so we can pay it back. Eventually it's going to fall apart. I think it's already happening right now. I think the jig is up on this, and I think the race to get out of the U.S. bond market has already begun. And you don't want to be the last one in and get caught holding the bag, because you're going to be just as unhappy as all of Bernie Madoff's customers.
And so I guess one question is, where is everybody going to go? Where are they flying to? Where are they going to be hiding if not in T-bills?
Well, wherever they want to be, they're just not going to lend money to us. They're not going to buy U.S. dollars. They're not going to buy dollar-denominated debt. So they're either going to buy debt in other countries, or they're going to buy precious metals. They're going to buy real things, but they're not going to just flush their money down a toilet, which is really what they're doing when they're buying treasuries.
Peter, we add into the fact that we're looking at huge deficits, $1.2 trillion before the stimulus package. We got the stimulus package coming. Is it a good idea in the very background that you're talking about?
Oh, no. The stimulus package is the worst thing that we can do. It's not going to stimulate the economy. It's just going to stifle it further. Everything the government has done thus far is contributing to the problem. It's making the problem worse, making the economy worse. Everything that Barack Obama is going to do is going to further deteriorate the fundamentals of the U.S. economy and make it weaker, make the dollar weaker, lead to a bigger decline in our standard of living, and ultimately a bigger collapse in the bond market.
So what are you saying, that all these governments around the world, the United States, Germany, Canada, everybody should just stand back and do nothing?
Well, no, there's something they can do. They can cut government spending. They can make government a smaller burden on society, so it's easier for the free market to work. You know, in America, we're in a gigantic hole. We have to go back to work in this country. We have to start making things and saving money, and it'd be a lot easier to do that if we didn't have to support this bloated federal government. But unfortunately, the government is getting bigger, not smaller. They're usurping more of our resources, and they're making it more difficult for us to make the necessary reforms that our economy badly needs.
But, Peter, you're going to have lots of job losses if you don't help the auto companies. Those kinds of things, you got to deal with all that.
Look, we're going to have job losses either way. What I want is inefficient jobs to go away so that they can be replaced with more efficient jobs. We need to restructure the U.S. economy. Instead, if we all end up working for government, we're all going to have jobs, but we're not going to have any wealth because the jobs are going to be phony. They're not going to produce any real purchasing power, and we're just going to be a nation of paupers. You know, we need real jobs. We don't need work for work's sake. We need to work productively, and we're not going to get productive employment by government dictate. We need market forces. We need entrepreneurs starting businesses, hiring people to make a profit. We need market dynamics that will work, not central government planning. Every time that's been tried, all it does is make situations worse. And it didn't work in China. It didn't work in the Soviet Union. It's not going to work in Washington, D.C. Barack Obama is no smarter than Khrushchev was or Mao was. It isn't going to work. He might think he's smarter. He might have the attitude that he's so much better than everybody else. And if he just puts the right bureaucrats in charge, that they're going to succeed where all the other ones have failed. But it's not going to work.
Peter, we could discuss this at length. I really appreciate the conversation. We'll get you back. Thanks very much.
Sure thing.